Welcome to the Rainbow Bull with Tim Volk from T. Volk and Company Consulting. In this podcast, Tim, a proud member of the LGBTQ community, discusses a range of topics around the 5 capitals of a flourishing family: human, intellectual, social, spiritual, and financial capital. Tim will use this framework as he and his guest experts delve into the secrets of the wealthy and how we might learn from them. So let's get started on this exciting adventure together. Parents usually have high hopes for their children, and maybe high expectations, but life happens, and parents and children both may need to adapt to reality. In this show, your host Tim Volk talks with author Wesley Davidson about her book, When Your Child is Gay, What You Need to Know. And the title only scratches the surface of the topic that Tim and his guest will tackle today. So Tim, tell us more about Wesley and how you two met.
Oh my God, it's so fun. You know, life, you never know when you're going to meet somebody new. And I just love that. And so we have a mutual friend, Suzanne Curry, who I was telling one day that I was being encouraged by my brethren to lean into the gay community on my practice and try, because, one of my friends who's a leading advisor, he lives in Jackson, Wyoming, but he's really Swiss. And he speaks 5 languages, but he acts like a cowboy. Well, he is a cowboy, but he just also is kind of fun. He's like, what you need to do, Tim? What you need to do is you just need to be the gay guy we call. Be the gay guy to call. And I just started laughing about it. And then one day when I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Suzanne, she's like, you know what, Tim? I love the idea. And I think what you need to do is you need to meet a friend of mine. You need to meet Wesley Davidson. I'm going to connect you to. And so lo and behold, we made this wonderful, thoughtful introduction. I don't know, we just clicked. I think that it's been a delight to get to know Wesley, and I thought that it would be wonderful to have her perspective on the show. I think it's fun for us to explore, the perspective of having a gay child and come from the parent side, because we're always thinking about from the gay person side. And I think that we don't have enough to talk about how the family has to adapt and how the family gets used to it and all the things around it. This goes to, the 5 capitals that we've discussed, Patrice, before, which is, for a family to flourish, we have the human capital, the intellectual capital, we have the social, spiritual, and financial capital of the family. And this, I believe, fits squarely into the human capital that, we have as a family that we have to continue to develop, actively develop. It'll touch on all the other capitals, the social capital being what's the wealth for, what's it about. The spiritual capital is really what's the value system we have as a family and what binds us together. So hopefully, I think from an audience perspective, you'll start to understand how this fits in. But welcome, Wesley.
Thank you.
So good to have you. And
thank you.
I love, the story. I think it's helpful for people to get to know you a little bit. I know you grew up in Connecticut, right?
Yes, I was born in Philadelphia and lived outside of Philadelphia till 1955. And when my mother remarried, we moved to Connecticut.
Love it. How did you? And then you had an interesting background, because if you've always wanted to be a journalist, if you always wanted to be an author.
I always did well in English, Tim. In fact, I went to a girls' school where I won a prize in the 8th grade for an essay I wrote. So I did well in English, horribly in math, but well in English. And after I got out of college, I worked in some art galleries, and I did some public relations writing for them, press releases, so forth. And then I decided to delve further. And after college, I went to NYU and took a lot of courses and went into advertising and public relations.
Oh, it's a natural journey in a way, but it doesn't,
yes,
when you're in the middle of it, it may not seem natural, but looking back at it, it seems like a natural.
And I was an art history major, and I think visually, and that helps in my writing.
Because you can see it.
Yes.
How did you meet your husband?
I met my husband in New York. He's from the South, and he came up to New York to work in finance. And he came up to New York after being in the Army, and he met me at a party through a mutual friend, worked with my husband. And my husband wanted to come up to New York just for a few years to get the, experience of working in New York. And he was going to go back down to Florida. And then he met me at the party. It was not love at first sight, but we certainly got along. And at the party, there were women just kind of hanging all over him. And I thought, well, this guy has possibilities. So, we started dating, and we met January 29th, 1972. And we were married October 12th, 1974.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Well, you've undersold him a little bit because you said, I think in our conversation that he was shot down and he won the purple.
He was in Vietnam the first day of the Tet Offensive. I didn't know him then. And the bullets came up through the floor of the plane and landed in his ankle. He was flying with a major. And afterwards, he was in a field hospital, which was scary because, the nurses had to come and move him underneath a cot because they were being bombed. And he came back to the States, and he was in a vet hospital for 6 months, I think. And during that time, he took a business course. He was a business major at Stetson University here in Florida. And then he made his way to New York, and he only knew a few people, but he wanted to get into finance, as I mentioned, and had a tough time getting a job because they all were hiring, being the North, people from Ivy League schools. And of course, he didn't come from an Ivy League school.
Right.
So what he did was he found out who the employment agencies were that were hiring, and went through that way, found out, like who was hiring from Blythe Eastman Dillon, who was hiring for Morgan Stanley. And he would take a job anywhere in the firm, like, in accounting, which he said was boring, but it got him into the firm. And then after that, when a job came up on the floor, he would take that, and he started excelling after that. So,
that's so fun to hear the journey, because I think it's helpful for listeners.
Yeah.
To know that you don't start at the top. You have to try to get in. You have to try to make your way and show up.
Yeah.
So he's self-made.
Yes, he is.
And he's from rural Georgia. Isn't that what if I
Yes, he grew up outside of Atlanta in a town called Lithonia. And his great grandfather, who he knew, was a Scottish stonecutter near Aberdeen, and came over to Lithonia because it means place of rock. So there were quarries there. And the Davidsons, built it up to be quite a business. A lot of granite for banks and poultry grit, but anyway, he did know his great grandfather, who was in the South with a Scottish accent. And then his family sold the business, and Sandy's immediate family, they moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And so he spent time there. That was in the 10th grade. And he graduated from high school there. And
It's unusual. I knew my great grandparents and grew up in a rural part of the country, Wyoming,
Yeah.
but my mother's whole side of the family are Scottish. McFarland, McLeod, Purdy, slightly Scottish.
Yeah.
And so, the German Scottish, the good news is we're very flexible. I'm not stubborn at all. Everybody's so easygoing.
Yeah.
I
And
love that.
Yeah.
So, and then you had 2 kids?
Yes, both adopted. Graham is the older of the 2. He was born in 1983, and he's the one we lost to drugs in 2016. And then Lee was born in 1988. So there's 5-year difference between the 2 of them. And they were adopted in New York at a private agency. It was a closed adoption.
So was it difficult to adopt?
Do
you remember?
It was the first time they really check you out, and you have to have letters written, and we thought at that time we were told we could only get 1 child. And after we received Graham in November 1988, we were told that we could adopt a 2nd child. So that's why we were able to adopt a daughter.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So did they have a normal childhood?
Yes, I think they did. We moved from the city to Westchester County in Chappaqua, New York. We were about 45 minutes from my mother and my sister, who lived in Connecticut. They went to good schools and, had a backyard and fairly nice house. And they had friends. I think Graham, because he had been in different foster parents' homes, had a bit of trauma that he never got over. He did not like the fact he was adopted, and I think that weighed on him his whole life. Lee couldn't care less, our daughter. Really? I remember once I thought, well, maybe she's hiding something from me. Maybe she really does have issues. And I took her to a teen talk. It was like group therapy at Spence Chapin, the adoption agency. And I asked her at the end how it went. And she said, I thought it was ridiculous. She said, I have a mother, a father, and a dog. I'm perfectly happy. So, that's the difference between the 2 children.
Wow.
Right there. Yeah.
Where did you know Graham was gay?
I found out through a letter that he had written. He never actually came out and said it.
Okay.
So that was when he was about 13, but I think he was conflicted because he had a crush on a girl in his class in middle school, and I would always have to drive him over after school to see Christine, who he said he was going to marry. So that, I think, was another issue for him. And as his sister Lee said, this was the 90s and it wasn't cool to be gay, So I think that weighed on him as well.
Yeah, I think it was, you do everything you can to not talk about being gay. And the therapists that I've had and people I've talked to that are very knowledgeable in this area said it's not unusual for a gay man who of that age era went out of your way to do everything really well. You'd excel in school, you'd excel at sports, you'd dress beautifully, you'd have great humor, you'd tell stories, you have a great body, whatever, to just keep the conversation deflected off of the topic you didn't want to talk about because you were so scared of people rejecting you. So I think that probably I think feeds into it. And then So go on, tell me a little more. So how the evolution of Graham, like I know there was a parallel path about him being gay, and then also he discovered, was it alcohol or drugs, or what did he just, how did his
I think,
addictions?
like most people that I've read about, they start with alcohol and marijuana.
Okay.
And um,
At a
Lee,
young age?
apparently, in middle school.
Oh.
Now it was the thinking back in the day when he was in middle school that he had ADD without a hyperactivity, but they wanted him to be on Ritalin. So he was taking Ritalin. And according to Lee, I didn't know this, he was going to school with ecstasy, cocaine, and alcohol. And what he was doing, which I didn't realize, he was siphoning off vodka out of a bottle we had. And we thought, and my husband was marking the label, saying that it was going down, down, down. But we thought the cleaning service we had were the people that were drinking vodka. So we never said anything. But
Oh my God.
I know.
Poor cleaning people. But
I know. I know.
so then how did you know it was him?
Lee told me later. I was interviewing Lee for the book that I'm working on now. And there's a chapter called What About Me?
Mm.
And she talks about what she knew that
Oh.
I didn't know.
Oh
And
gosh,
that was
what
one
did you
of the
learn?
things.
What
Well, for example, I didn't realize he was taking all these things to school, these various substances. And the other thing is, we had a Cape Cod colonial and it was 2 bedroom. But when we bought the house, there was room for bedroom over the garage, which the people that sold the house had never finished. And there also was room for a third bedroom. So we thought we'd turn the second bedroom into a guest room. Lee had the third bedroom, and Graham had the bedroom over the garage. Well, the bedroom over the garage had 2 exits. One went through the garage, and the other one went to the yard. And we didn't think anything of it. Well, it turns out that Graham was having people come up to his room and he was trading drugs with them and sharing drugs with them. And what they would do is they would park their car on the street, not our driveway, and come up at night. I mean, it was crazy, but because our bedroom was on the other end of the house and we're sound sleepers, I didn't know this was going on. So I know.
So when you were talking to your daughter, interviewing your daughter, were your mouth, was it going, oh my God?
Yeah, I mean,
It started to make sense, maybe?
yeah, it did in a way, but I felt badly for her because she's in the middle. She
Right.
knows he's harming himself, but
Yeah.
she can't tell mom and dad and rat on her brother.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So then, so when did you find out he was, I guess, using, or what would be the term? I guess using? Or when did you tell it was an addiction, or could you tell there was
I
something
could
going on?
tell he did fairly well in school in 9th grade.
All
10th
right.
grade, he really fell apart. He didn't look the same. He was very skinny. And, that's when I started being really concerned. And he went to a rehab that was local. And then in 10th grade, the school was willing to alter his work to make it easier for him to, and he didn't even care. At that point, he had dropped out of school. So
Oh, he
yeah,
dropped out.
He dropped out.
And that was in 10th or 11th grade?
10th grade. And I also noticed in 10th grade that there were kids that, this was supposed to be a liberal community, but there were kids that were teasing him about being gay. So he didn't want to go to school like a lot of kids don't if they're harassed. So.
Did he tell you that?
Yeah, he did. And I did call one of the parents, but the parent sounded like a bully himself. Well, I'm going to, beat the crap out of, I don't want to say the name of this guy that was.
Well, it doesn't matter now, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not an uncommon trait for people to be bullied, whether they're LGBTQ.
It's actually getting worse.
It's getting worse instead of better. Yeah.
Cyberbullying is terrible. So after 10th grade, it was suggested by an independent guidance counselor that he should probably go to a therapeutic boarding school. And that was an 18-month program. And it was basically a lockdown situation. And Graham hated it. I mean, he made friends with mostly girls because they always protected him from the bullies. But there were court-ordered kids there, and Graham was not court-ordered. And so he didn't like it. And I think one of the reasons he didn't like it, just kind of wax psychological, but I think he felt like he was being given up again, like adoption. Here we go again.
I see.
There's something wrong with me and people can't cope with me, and that's why I'm being sent away again.
Then he stopped using for the 18 months?
Well, yeah, there's no way you could use it at school. I mean,
So then he gets out.
He gets out, and
I'm fast forwarding this because it's.
He gets out, he comes home, and the first night he's off to New York with his friends that he hasn't seen in a long time and using ecstasy, So
he's back.
He's back, with all this.
So did you and your husband, I know this is a stupid question. I'm sure you tried to intervene. You told me you sent him to rehab. You did all these things, right?
Multiple rehabs. As Graham said, we threw money at it, but
did it work?
No, it didn't. But it's not unusual to go to a lot of rehabs. But I think part of the problem is, I've got some statistics that if you start using drugs, substances, before you're 21, your chances are greater of developing a real substance abuse disorder. Because your prefrontal cortex, which is used for judgment and evaluation, isn't developed. And you've been using drugs longer than the person who starts later. It's much harder to get. You have a real dependence on it.
Excuse me. Yes, you. Thanks so much for listening to The Rainbow Bull. We hope you're enjoying it so far. And if you have any questions or would like to talk more about this topic, you can find us at www.tvolkco.com. And all our social media platforms are listed in the show notes.
So the rehabs didn't work. He comes out of rehab, and he decided he wanted to leave home. I mean, he obviously had a welcoming home.
Yes.
But at some point, you guys, I mean, what did you learn about this? What would you like to tell other parents or other siblings?
I think you really have to investigate where you're sending your child. I mean, most of these rehabs are 28 days. They're in the middle of nowhere, so they're sequestered. And they do a little group therapy, a little detoxing, but that's it. And they don't make a lot of recommendations of what you should be doing once you're out. For example, Paris Hilton went to a boarding school in Provo, Utah, and she's making a documentary right now. She was raped. She was put in solitary confinement. You really
Paris
have,
Hilton.
yes, you have to be very careful. And most of the rehabs are for profit. So, and a lot of kids can run away because they're not minors. And I think parents should get in writing what happens if your child leaves. Do you get some of the money back? Because they're not cheap. And so I would do that. The other thing, I learned is you really can't fix a kid, especially if they're of majority age. And you have a little more control if they're younger, because you can put them, in a hospital or something. But once they turn majority age, they just sign them out. They sign themselves out of wherever they are. So that's a problem. And the other thing is, I think you have to hold your kids accountable. We were kind of loosey-goosey about that. We were, like I kicked our son out of the house in Florida here because he was using drugs, which I found. But then I would feel badly about it, and I put him up at the Holiday Inn. Now, so, I mean, if you're going to hold your child accountable, you don't do something like that. So, you have to learn that, that you allow yourself to be manipulated by doing something like that. You have to be stricter, I think. And
Which is not easy.
no, it's not, because,
You love them.
a parental inclination is to help a child who's struggling. And, when they're younger, you can withdraw a dessert if they're not behaving, or you send them to your room, or, you can't do that when they're older.
How did he die?
He died in California. That was his third trip. And he had been sober for a while.
Oh.
And what happened was he had crystal meth in his system, which is very prominent in the gay community.
Very.
Highly addicted. And I think he probably started out at the same dose he was used to and instantly had a heart attack. So
Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book because I couldn't find the book I wanted, but this is going back in the 1990s.
Okay.
And the books I found at Barnes and Noble, they didn't even use the word gay. They had they referred to people as homosexual. So I figured if I had issues, other parents must as well. And so I wrote the book, and I found a psychiatrist who happens to be gay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote from a parent's point of view, and I correlated the chapters with the different issues that were raised. So I interviewed LGBT people who were under 40, because I figured the ones that were over 40 would have different experience than the younger ones.
Right.
And I would get their impression of how they worked through an issue that was addressed in that chapter. And then the psychiatrist would comment at the end of each chapter in a section called "The Doctor is In," and he would give the takeaway message.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of set up the book like, if you're familiar with Kubler-Ross, the Swiss psychiatrist who thinks you should work through stages like anger and fear and shame and to get to total acceptance of the child. And so we set it up like that. And it was an interesting experience. And in writing the book, I saw the connection between the gay population and the high usage of drugs. So that kind of morphed into wanting to write about addiction. And
so the interviews, you interviewed, what was it, 100 families, 100 kids? I don't remember. 40 kids? I don't remember the number of kids. You interviewed a lot of,
I interviewed parents, I interviewed kids, and you mean when your child is gay, you're talking about?
Yeah, when you're
about
the first book.
Interviews per chapter.
Yeah.
So there were 5 chapters, I believe. So
what did you learn? Like, how did people react to the book? Did you learn anything, or were there any ahas? I mean, obviously the aha with the gay community, the addiction factor being higher.
Right.
That's a big aha.
Right. And also, school harassment was a thing. But the other thing I found out was there's a higher, what they call comorbidity, a higher incident of mental health conditions that gays have. And when I say gays, I mean lesbians and bisexuals, and certainly transgenders really have problems with suicide.
Yeah.
And so, yes, and, now I just saw in the New York Times about the mental health of kids now, and not just gay kids, but
in general.
The emergency room visits are just, I mean, if you want to hear, I'll just quickly tell you, is up 4.8 million to 7.5 million from 2011 to 2020. So, and 6 to 24-year-olds are coming in to the emergency room. The emergency rooms used to be for, you break your leg or you have a rash or something, and now they're coming in for mental health.
So I think one of the things I wanted to ask, and I know it's a delicate thing, is that you can speak to loss in a very unique way. I don't think any parent should ever lose their child. It's just not the natural order way we think of things. It's not how we do estate planning. It's not how we all are geared to think. So can you speak to the loss? Can you just tell people? I know you had a cute story about, you said people were wonderful between the death and the funeral.
Well, I think there's this whole phenomenon now because kids are predeceasing their parents' death because of fentanyl and these other drugs. So there really is no etiquette for how, your so-called friends should be following up with you. I'll put it that way. I mean, when they found out, it was great. You got casseroles, you got flowers, and then, you got the mass cards and you got condolence notes. But that all stops after the funeral. And I think people, they don't know what to say to you. That's the thing. They think that they might be dragging you into a dark place that you may not want to remember. And I think it's the opposite. I think they should be supporting you and talking to you. And also, it keeps the person who's dead alive. And
I like that.
Yeah, it's and the other thing is, in the first book I wrote, Kubler-Ross has definite stages and feels that you can come to total acceptance of a loss. I feel, just writing the second book, I don't feel that way. There's something called ambiguous loss.
Okay.
And she's a PhD. Her name is Pauline Boss. She's written papers about this. And to me, I think the loss goes on forever. And you just have to deal with it daily and work it into your life.
There's probably not a day goes by where you don't think about Graham.
No, I don't. And just, I kind of keep him alive. Like I watch Wheel of Fortune because that was his favorite show, or I listen to James Taylor on the radio because he liked him. And and Lee does the same thing. She's got he really likes Snoopy, and he's buried with Snoopy, his stuffed animal. She's got a Snoopy tattoo on her. She's got his initials and the date he was born on her leg. And, I think that's her way also of keeping him alive.
So he was a very good looking, you told me he was very good looking.
Oh, he's very handsome.
And smart when he wanted it. He was very clever, obviously more clever than everybody knew, even at a young age.
Right, exactly.
So I think, when you wrote the book and now you're writing the new book, we're going to touch on the new book in a minute, but is there something you wanted to say to either other LGBTQ people or to the parents that you haven't said after you wrote the first book?
I think when you have LGBTQ kids, that you have to let them tell you. I think they know more than you do. So this is reversing the roles, that, you have to listen to them because they know best. And also, I think there's a way to get a gay child to open up. You can't just say, look, I think you're gay, you're not playing football, you're in drama or whatever. I think you can go in through the back door. You can say, oh, I saw this program the other night and it was on gay kids. And do you think this is true? Or do you know anybody at school that's gay? You don't confront them directly, but there might be issues you can discuss together. And also, I think, parents, well, it's in the book too, parents should treat their gay child as they do their heterosexual child. If a child is dating, I think, if Susie, who's heterosexual, is having her boyfriend to dinner, I think you should allow your gay child to bring their boyfriend to dinner so that there's no discrepancy on how they're being raised or feeling ashamed.
To show everybody it's okay.
Yeah. I think things have changed for the better, but I still think, it's not a one-shot discussion. You have to keep it up and say, how are things in school? And, find out what's going on in their life.
I don't think it's a one shot either. I think there's a comfort level that comes with a little more discussion and prep. And unfortunately, I was outed, and my little sister and I talk about it now because she's now with a woman, so she's now lesbian, and so she and I talk. We kind of laugh about it. But the time she outed me to my dad because she overheard a conversation with my now husband and I talking on the phone, and so the family went nuts. I mean, it's a lot of dynamic that goes on. I've written about it. I've written a couple white papers about this, but the comedy was that we weren't going to go to my grandmother's house for dinner for Christmas, or I think one of the holidays, and she was not happy. So I didn't know how to meeting with my dad and uncle, and just said, look, it's enough. You got to stop. Tim's gay. His boyfriend is John. He's lovely. I want him to come to dinner. I don't want to hear anything more about it. And she had the matriarch of the family kind of laid it down. And I think my dad and my uncle, my family's been very warm and accepting since. But I think as any time it happens, there's I don't want to call it a shock factor, but I think there's sort of a bit of a surprise when you discuss it. And so even though I'd been dealing with it for many years, you all of a sudden was discussing it. It may be something I want to discuss right now. You could have been having a bad day where your book isn't being done right or something, and it catches you off guard. And so as in human beings say things they shouldn't say sometimes, or we don't react the way we really want to react until you have to process it. So I don't know. I really applaud your willingness to come forward and help others with this. I think you've taken a very dark and sad situation, and I think in Graham's honor, you really have done him proud to reach out and help all of us and help the whole world. And so I'm really excited that you're willing to do and talk about this. But I really want to have you sort of talk a little prep about what you're doing now. What's so exciting about the new project you're working on?
I think it's exciting because it's helping parents who are desperate for answers, and they're stuck in the middle of trying to intervene and it's not working. So I'm hoping that the book, which will contain interviews of reformed substance abusers, will lend their knowledge to what helped them get sober. So it has memoir characteristics, but it's not a straightforward memoir. It's interviews with people who have been affected, other parents who have lost, and what they've learned about the loss. And but I think it will be helpful. Eventually, I'd like to work with an organization like Bring Change to Mind. If you thought of, do you know that organization?
Mm-mm.
That Glenn Close. Glenn Close runs an organization. She has a lot of bipolar disorder in her family, and she has emissaries, if you want to call them, that go into schools and talk to kids about mental illness and that there shouldn't be a shame to it. And a lot of, I think the LGBT group is numbing themselves because they have mental health conditions. I mean, if people are harassing you at school and not accepting, you would have problems, even if they're, as simple as anxiety. They're, but I think there are more helpful things out there now. I remember Graham told me when he did go to support groups that there's one called Smart Recovery now, which is more kind of ego-centered. It relies more on the individual than it does on the notion of the higher power, the God, which the rehabs all have, the 12-step programs, but this is new. And I think there's more of an opening up about addiction. I know there's a representative in Pennsylvania. Her last name is Dean. She's a Democrat. And she and her son have written a book. He's a recovered addict. He's been in recovery now for about 9 years.
So you're putting this in your book too?
No, I'm not putting it in the book, but I'm saying
okay.
A lot of memoirs are being written. I think people are
that's good.
open. And she's a public figure because she's a representative, a Democrat in Pennsylvania, and she's writing the book with her son, who has been in recovery for a long time.
What was Glenn Close's organization again called?
Bring Change to Mind.
I love that. I can hardly wait because I'd like to have you back to the show to talk about the new book.
Okay.
When it's ready to go. And, we may.
It's supposed to come out in May of next year.
I love this. You really, thank you for being such an advocate and helping those people that don't have a voice, and also being there for all of us. You don't know how much it means to me being a a gay man, and I would love you to connect to my mom. I think you guys would have a lot in common. So it's just great in the sense that my great moms, and helping others. So Patrice, what do you think? Anything else we should talk about?
Well, I think we definitely need to get Wesley back here for a second part to the series here.
Yep.
And we also will have, Wesley will have links to your book in the show notes. Yes, Tim?
Yep.
Okay, definitely that. And then, Tim, if people have questions for you to pass on to Wesley, how can they reach you?
Oh, just email me at tim.volk@tvolkco.com or call me at 312-636-5855, and happy to connect you with Wesley. It's also, Wesley, you have your own website. It's wesleydavidson.com. Is that what it is?
That's right. And I have 2 blogs on it, When Your Child is LGBT and When Your Child is Addicted. And I started a Facebook group, Kids on Drugs, Signs, Risk, and How to Get Help.
And again, all in the show notes. Make sure it gets in there, Tim.
I don't know if you can see this. This is
That's great. I love it. We'll have a link to it. We will have it.
All right. Good.
Well, Wesley, thank you so much. It was fascinating. Tim, great show. And listener, follow this podcast. Share it with others. You know who needs it. I'm Patrice Sikora. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for listening to the Rainbow Bull Podcast. Visit our website at www.tvolco.com or give us a call at 312-636-5855. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of T. Volk and Company Consulting. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.